Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening in the world. This is Laszlo Montgomery once again with another edition of the China History Podcast. As promised, today is the first in a series of dynastic overviews from the first Chinese dynasty to the last. I've been getting a lot of mail these past several days regarding doing shows chronologically and also sticking to the way I've been doing them up till now, sort of jumping around in and out of different eras of Chinese history, ancient and modern. It looks like there's quite a lot of you out there who sort of liked it the way it was, and we're going to keep it that way. I don't want to appear wishy-washy or anything, but what we'll do for now is introduce the dynasties, starting with the Xia today, and maybe go up to about the Qin period. I covered the Qin dynasty in my first podcast episode when we looked at the first emperor of a unified China. So we'll do both, the dynastic overviews and also some other topics that might be of interest to you. Today we look at the Xia dynasty. This was the first dynasty of China, and let me put air quotes around the word dynasty. We're really digging deep into Chinese history, and trust me when I say it's real slim pickings when it comes to material that can be trusted about this time period. If not for the records of the grand historian and the bamboo annals, there'd hardly be anything to tell you except for the legends that are associated with this time. Even the time period isn't known. I scoured the web, my personal library, and Google Books for anything and everything covering the Xia. I found conflicting info on the period in question. Some said 2070 BC to 1600 BC, 1989 to 1558 BC, 2100 to 1600 BC, 2205 to 1776 BC, sort of all over the place. Some even say the first three dynasties all ran concurrently, the Xia, the Shang, and the Zhou. Like the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley in India, and the Nile in Egypt, China's earliest beginnings were the product of a great river valley, in this case the Yellow River. The Yellow River is the world's sixth longest, at 5,500 kilometers, although these days parts of it resemble a dry lake more than a river. That's where it all began for China, the Yellow River. It was known by many nicknames, but the one I always remember was China's Sorrow, 中国的痛. It wasn't a very deep river, especially in the lower courses where our story begins. Going back to the cradle of Chinese civilization, and for the next 4,000 years that followed, the Huanghe, or Yellow River, flooded 1,500 to 1,600 times, and even changed course half a dozen times. I first saw the Yellow River myself back in 1980 when I was in Jinan in Shandong province. It's yellow is all I could say. All that silt that originated in the plateaus out west give it that distinctive color. If you don't mind, I'm just going to leapfrog all the Chinese Neolithic cultures and get right into the subject for today. The Xia dynasty, and that's spelled X-I-A in the pinyin system of Chinese romanization. I explained that X sound in the last question and answer podcast. In the old Wade-Giles system, it's written H-S-I-A. It was the first of China's three dynasties of the Bronze Age, the Shang and the Zhou being the other two to round out this trio. In fact, you can call the Xia period a Neolithic dynasty. This is the period, say about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago when metal, copper, and bronze mostly starts to become prevalent in the great civilizations that were starting to form. The Neolithic period, or some refer to it as the New Stone Age, started around 10,000 or 9,000 BC and then sort of blends into the Bronze and Iron Age, which just sort of slowly peters out. This is the case with the Xia time period in China. Now, the Zhou dynasty, the third of these three dynasties, was the only one that left any written records of their time period. That means everything we know about the Xia and Shang dynasties comes from records written after the fact. For this reason, we refer to the Xia as a legendary dynasty. Even if you go with the 2070 BC as the approximate start date, that's almost 4,100 years ago. This period, to give you a time reference, was a good 500 years after the Great Pyramid was completed in 2560 BC. The Old Kingdom in Egypt is ending about now, and the Middle Kingdom period is just starting. So it's hard enough to get solid info from history from even 500 years ago, so you can imagine what kind of data there is to accurately tell the story of the Xia dynasty. There's a lot of speculation and analysis from some very smart historians, archaeologists, but The Xia doesn't have much, if anything, to show for itself. That's why the appellation legendary will often precede the name of this dynasty. The population of China back then was about 1 to 2 million people, all living in various states or kingdoms led by whoever the local strongman or leader was. They were constantly warring with each other, and there wasn't even a hint of any unified central government. China still had a good 2 millennia to go yet before the likes of Qin Shi Huangdi molded all these warring states and kingdoms into one central Chinese state. The Xia lasted approximately 439 years by most reckoning, and according to Sima Qian's great work, the Shiji, or Records of the Grand Historian, there were 17 emperors from this dynasty. Sima Qian, once again, as I mentioned in previous podcasts, is called the Herodotus of China, and he referred to the Xia as the first dynasty. Sima begins his work with the Sanhuang Wu Di, or 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. A quick rundown on the Sanhuang, or the 3 sovereigns. Depending on which sacred text you're reading, the 3 were Fu Xi and his queen Niu Wa, who gave mankind the idea of marriage, music, writing, painting, fishing with nets, how to domesticate animals, and how the whole silkworm thing worked. Fu Xi died and was followed by Shen Nong, the second of the 3 sovereigns. Shen Nong, as his name suggests, since the word nong means agriculture, and a nongmin is a farmer, introduced agriculture to the people and gave the plow to mankind. He also introduced markets and trade, and is also credited with creating Chinese medicine that used natural plants and herbs. The third, some say, was Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, but an equal number of texts also called the third sovereign the Three-Eyed Suiren. He was the Prometheus of China, as he gave fire to man and taught him how to use it. Huangdi, or the Yellow Emperor, as I just said, is considered the first of the 5 legendary emperors. The descendants of the first 3 dynasties in Chinese history, the Xia, Shang, and Zhou, all claimed lineage from the Yellow Emperor. He is the originator of Chinese culture, the first son of heaven, inventor of garment making, boats, vehicles of transport, houses and palaces. All Chinese, according to the mythology, would be considered descendants of the Yellow Emperor. In quick succession, you had the Yellow Emperor, followed by his grandson Zhuanxu, the Emperor Ku, the Emperor Yao, and last but not least, Emperor Shun. Our story, as far as the Xia dynasty is concerned, begins with Emperor Yao. Now, it was said that during the time of Yao and Shun, the primitive patriarchal society started to develop into more of a monarchical style. During the time of Yao, the Yellow River was flooding like crazy and causing all kinds of devastation. As the legend goes, Yao sought help from the people to come up with some sort of way to control this river and all the flooding that was caused by it. A man of reputation as a problem solver named Gun was chosen by Emperor Yao to take on this great task to control the flooding. Gun tried all kinds of methods, dams, dikes, and what have you. After 9 years of trying, he failed. Now, during this period when Gun was trying to relieve the flooding, Emperor Yao handed power over to the last of the 5 emperors, Shun. And it was Shun who, seeing Gun's failure, had him banished or executed for the crime of not pulling through on such an important mission. And so it fell upon Gun's son, named Yu, to finish the job that his father started. It is written that Yu was born in Sichuan, in modern-day Beichuan. Some of you may remember this town as ground zero for the massive 2008 Great Sichuan earthquake. Yu left Beichuan for Songshan, known as one of the 5 sacred mountains of China. Songshan was just south of the Yellow River, right smack dab in between Luoyang and Zhengzhou in Henan province. Chinese kung fu enthusiasts might be interested to know that Shaolin Temple was also right close by Songshan. Now, Yu was fully cognizant of what his father tried and failed to do, and he was resolved to succeed as a way to sort of avenge his father's honor. And so the legend of Yu the Great begins with the taming of the floods. Now, Yu was a great-great-grandson of the Yellow Emperor and a grandson of Zhuanxu, and he's a certified hero in Chinese folklore. He was described as an active, prompt, capable, and diligent man. His virtues were prominent, and his goodness made him beloved by the people, and his word could be trusted. Yu worked on this problem for 13 years. The most famous story from this period concerned his selfless commitment to the task at hand. During the period of 13 years, he made it back to his hometown 3 times, and on each of the 3 occasions did not even enter his home, but instead kept walking right past it. So selflessly devoted was Yu to solving the problem of the flooding first, that he ignored his family in favor of completing his work. Yu traveled the entirety of the realm at the time, which was centered around present-day Henan, Shanxi, and Shanxi. Notice those last 2 provinces. Now, here's a quick sidebar on Chinese language, and this one always tripped me up. You have 2 provinces in China right next door to each other. They are both spelled Shanxi in the pinyin system of romanization, but one is pronounced Shanxi, that's first tone, and the other one's pronounced Shanxi, third tone shan, and then the same exact character shi. That's a good example of how just a slight difference in tone changes everything. Well, to make things easier, the China government officially spells Shanxi as SHAANXI and Shanxi as SHANXI. It's bad enough that they are homonyms, but why did they have to be right next door to each other, too? Even to this day, sometimes I have to stop and think, Xi'an, is that Shanxi or Shanxi? Anyway, portions of these 3 provinces is the area where we're concerned with. And it was through these 3 provinces that the Yellow River ran, and still runs today, as a matter of fact. Yu made a unified plan to control the problem and used dredging and canals and levees as his method to relieve the flooding. He had all these streams and ditches dredged and channeled the floodwaters out to the sea. His method worked, and great honors were heaped upon him. Shun presented Yu with a dark jade scepter and announced to everyone the achievement of Yu. He then presented Yu to the heavens and proclaimed him his heir. Then 17 years later, Shun died and Yu became the emperor. His dynastic title was Lord of Xia, and his family name was Si. Yu was given the appellation of the Great. Da Yu he's referred to. Yu the Great. He became the first king of the Xia Dynasty. Now, other than this legend of the floods and how Yu the Great tamed them and became the emperor, it is really thin gruel indeed about the rest of the Xia Dynasty. In fact, the matter of succession to Yu the Great is about all there is to the story, and then for the next 14 emperors, there aren't even any wild legends to talk about. It's not until the last emperor of the Xia Dynasty that you get a little bit of meat in that thin gruel. As I said, there are no written records or even hard evidence of the existence of the Xia Dynasty. Everything we know comes from either Sima Qian or from the bamboo annals of about 300 BC. The way kings were chosen up until Yu's time was through the process of meritorious succession. Whoever was the best man for the job got the job. But it was with Yu that we get the first hereditary dynasty. Now, Yu chose his own successor amongst his tribal chiefs, a man called Gao Yao, but he didn't survive Yu the Great, and they had to think of a plan B. Now, Yu came up with someone named Bo Yi, but once Yu died, somewhere near Shaoxing in Zhejiang province, Yu's son, named Qi, was elected in Bo Yi's place. What happened to Bo Yi, no one knows. I read accounts that he was killed by Qi. So the leadership passes from father to son, and here we have the first hereditary dynasty. So let's just fast forward 4.5 centuries to the 17th and last ruler of the Xia dynasty, Emperor Jie. Yu the Great and Emperor Jie are sort of like a pair of bookends, one at the start and one at the finish of the Xia dynasty. One went down in history revered, almost as a god, and the other, well, he's remembered as an evil tyrant who personified all the things that one normally attributes to a bad emperor. Extravagant, wasteful, more concerned with carnal pleasures than matters of state or the welfare of the people. Stuff like that. Every civilization from every corner of the world is littered with these kinds of characters. Sima Qian alleges that the Xiongnu, the people who we discussed in the Qin Shi Huang podcast, could be traced to Emperor Jie's son, The Xiongnu were a thorn in the side of the Han Chinese throughout history, or at least till the time of the Tang Dynasty. There's an old legend regarding Emperor Xia that every source I read mentioned. He was infatuated with this evil concubine named Mo Xi. He humored her ridiculous request one day to have a lake constructed and filled to the brim with wine instead of water, enough for 3,000 soldiers to jump in and to drink it dry. The legend has it that they all drowned, and the sheer outrageousness of this request made for a great legend, and whether or not it happened, who knows. But they definitely pinned it on Xia, and it was something he had associated with his name that showed what kind of a ruler he was. There were all kinds of natural disasters and astronomical anomalies during the time of Xia that were mentioned in the ancient writings. Stuff like this is usually associated with a ruler who loses the mandate of heaven. There was a virtuous man who was part of Xia's court named Yin Yi, who came from the state of Shang. He tried to advise Xia to cool it and be more of a man of the people, but Emperor Xia would have nothing of this. Well, this Yi Yin, he ended up throwing his lot in with King Tang of the Shang state. The Shang state went from being one of the many states subservient to the Xia, but ended up defeating Xia in battle and forced him to flee to Nanchao in present-day Anhui, where the last emperor of the Xia dynasty died in 1675 BC. Once King Tang saw that the Xia was in decline, he initiated a number of wars that ultimately led to the demise of not only the wicked Emperor Xia, but his dynasty as well. It was 1675 BC when the Xia ended and the Shang began. Like I said at the beginning, the dates aren't agreed upon. Some say 1675 BC the Xia ended, and others say 1600 BC. And it's the Shang dynasty that we'll look at in the next podcast. There's only two words that come to mind when I think of the Shang, and that's oracle bones. The Shang people didn't leave any written records that survived to modern times, so all we have is whatever archaeologists have been able to dig up. So we'll cover what a lot of people call the first real dynasty of China. And trust me when I say there isn't much to hang on to, and it's only slightly less legendary than the Xia. I hope you'll tune in when I air that one. So, for now, this is Laszlo Montgomery once again wishing everyone a fond farewell from blissful Claremont, California, 91711. The one, the only. Keep those questions, topic suggestions, and comments coming, and feel free to visit my website at ChinaHistoryPodcast.com. Take care, everybody.